And there is now, you should have heard an audio indicator letting you know that the recording has started. So I'll click got it and make that go away. So before we get to our presentations, we'll just move the slide forward, I'd like to provide a little background on Age Friendly and our Alberta community of practice. So Age Friendly is a global movement that has been spearheaded by the World Health Organization, and it's a model to enable active, healthy aging by focusing on 8 domains of community living. You can see those in the little flower graphic on that slide. Age-friendly communities help seniors remain engaged in their communities through the development of supportive built and social environments that facilitate exercise, social connection, and respect for seniors. And the journey to becoming an age-friendly community employs a bottom-up and participatory approach that involves the active participation of citizens of varying ages and abilities in all aspects of planning. And the cornerstone of this model is developing a community plan that brings together traditional and non-traditional partners to identify community assets and strengths that facilitate social inclusion of seniors and also factors that hinder it. Each age-friendly plan is unique because it addresses that community's specific needs and is developed by and for that community. Implementation can be achieved through small steps initiated by local community members, through more major initiatives that require greater resources and contributions, or the collaborative efforts of a range of groups. So the Alberta Age-Friendly Community of Practice is designed to help communities that are considering or who are in the process of developing an age-friendly plan. This is a closed group in which members meet regularly and offer support to each other in a sharing and mentoring capacity. There's also an open discussion group, and that's open to anyone interested in the age-friendly concept or in its 8 domains. And the focus of this group is disseminating information and providing opportunities to ask questions and share information. So members may or may not be involved in a formal age-friendly initiative. And if you're interested in learning more about age-friendly and either of these 2 groups, I would encourage you to visit corealberta.ca for more information. So setting the stage for age-friendly housing, we know that the seniors population is very multifaceted and they have diverse living arrangements and housing needs. We also know that as people grow older, their needs and their capabilities can change, and they may experience challenges in finding suitable housing to accommodate those needs. And so that's one of the main reasons why the Alberta Age-Friendly Community of Practice is exploring this topic and trying to share information to support the housing needs of older Albertans. The population aged 65 years and older is expected to increase in our province, both in number and population percentage. And most of this population want to stay in their own homes for as long as they can. According to the 2016 census, the vast majority of Alberta seniors, so that's about 90%, live in private dwellings. That includes movable dwellings, apartment buildings, and houses as well. The approximately 86% of seniors in Alberta who live in private dwellings about 86% of seniors in these dwellings are homeowners, and then about 1 of every 7 Alberta seniors in a private dwelling is a renter. And about a quarter of these seniors live alone. We know that seniors are less likely to move than the general population, and when they do move, those moves can be characterized often as either lifestyle moves, planned moves, or even crisis moves. And each of these is usually underpinned by various push factors, such as perhaps the death of a spouse, or pull factors, such as a desire to be closer to children or grandchildren. And lastly, according to the 2020-2021 Alberta Seniors and Housing Annual Report, the Alberta Seniors Benefit was provided to more than 170,000 seniors with low income to better meet their basic needs and assist with monthly living expenses. So why is the Alberta Age-Friendly Community of Practice hosting this series? Well, according to the World Health Organization, the housing conditions of older people are often linked to their quality of life and to whether they're able to age independently and remain active in their communities. Appropriate housing design and its proximity to community and social services allow older residents to live comfortably and safely, while housing affordability gives them peace of mind. On this slide, you can see a few of the location, design, and affordability factors the WHO considers important when looking at how age-friendly a community is. When considering affordability specifically, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's threshold for all Canadians of all ages is housing that costs no more than 30% of gross household income. And that's to ensure that households have resources still available for things like food, transportation, other basic needs, and also other factors that contribute to quality of life. So through this 5-part series, the community of practice is exploring the range of seniors housing, from homelessness to continuing care. And the goals for this series are to first help foster a shared understanding of the housing needs of seniors. Second, identify factors that enable and support seniors in living independently. And finally, encourage and facilitate a variety of age-friendly housing options for seniors. So in the first session in our series, which was on February 23rd, we set the stage by looking at why this topic is important, where Alberta seniors live, and what their housing preferences are. Participants also heard how the Alberta Affordable Housing Strategy supports housing for lower income seniors. The second session on March 23rd provided participants with a picture of what homelessness for seniors looks like, how their experience is different from that of non-seniors, and information on work that's being done to address homelessness among seniors. Participants also learned what living well in community means from a housing perspective, some of the challenges and opportunities, and what role community partners can play in supporting affordable housing for seniors. So with all that background information, I think we are ready to get into our agenda for today. So in this third session of the Age-Friendly Housing series, we will learn how the spaces people live in affect their independence, how accessible architecture can support aging in place, and some of the trade-offs that older adults might face when they want to renovate their homes to make them more accessible. We will also hear about work that can support communities in diversifying their housing stock, and some of the challenges and opportunities in encouraging more accessible market housing. After the 3 presentations that we have today, there will be time for questions and answers. So please feel free to place them in the chat as they come to mind so that we can address them when we reach our Q&A at the end. So we're very fortunate to have with us today to present 3 excellent presenters. Our first will be Ron Wickman, who is an Edmonton-based architect specializing in barrier-free design. Then we will hear from Rachelle Butler, who is the program coordinator for the Residential Accessible Design, or RAD, Renovations program through Accessible Housing based in Calgary. And finally, Stephanie Firestone, who is a senior strategic policy advisor for health and age-friendly communities for AARP International, and she's joining us today from Washington, D.C. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Ron to share his screen and let us know about barrier-free design.
Thanks. Let me just get things going here. Okay, just make sure everybody can see that then.
Yep, we see it.
Take that as a yes. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Happy to speak about accessible housing, especially as it pertains to our elderly population. I'm an architect working here in Edmonton. I started my practice in 1995 with a focus on accessibility. And in 2020, I was able to get a book published on accessible architecture, which I call Beyond the Ramp. And it is a book that looks at accessibility from a broad range. So in some cases, we might be looking at a small residential bathroom modification to a rather large building. I come by accessible design from a lived experience. I was only a few months old when my father was injured in a work-related accident. He was a paraplegic. That started at 23 for him in 1964. And he became quite an advocate here in Edmonton, was a city councillor for 9 years and was a Liberal MLA for 12 years. So with all his advocacy, I was exposed to people with disabilities and a variety of different disabilities. So in my work, I just quickly here, a lot of residential work, which I'll be focusing on today, renovations or homes, single family homes for clients, looking at multifamily, and I'll be talking a little bit about the flex housing concept as well. So the most important thing I would like to say is that we become better and more knowledgeable, as in my case as a designer, if we do have that lived experience. So we need to spend time with people who have disabilities, our aging population. I'm 57 now, so I'm starting to have a real lived experience as well. So I often go to friends of mine who have various disabilities when I'm working on any particular project. For those of you that are maybe not familiar with a lot of the terminology that we use, just really quickly here, the first concept of accessible architecture is what we call visitability, and it's the simplest and easiest form of accessibility. Visitability is simply having a dwelling that is accessible for a visit. So there's three key elements that are required: a no-step entrance, a door and hallways wide enough to get through and maneuver in a home, and a bathroom on that level that you enter that would be usable by somebody with a disability. So this is something that's very easy to do. It's something that I've been promoting for a really long time in our housing industry. And frankly, it's really, it really is a bit of a tough sell. I'm not sure why, but it just is. People seem to be fascinated with having steps at their front door, as we see almost everywhere. A little bit more complex than visitability is what we call adaptability or flex housing. Flex housing is a Canadian term, which essentially means housing that's adaptable, affordable, and accessible. So creating an adaptable home would be, for example, having a bathroom with the required backing so that you could add grab bars at any point in the future. You might have an elevator shaft built into a new home design that you could later add an elevator at some point in the future if you were ever to need it. It's interesting to point out that I've often started projects where we talked about having the elevator shaft and using or installing the elevator later on, but in 100% of the time, people end up installing the elevator as well. And what people don't understand often is that a residential elevator, it can be as low as $20,000. So if you're building a new house that's $500,000 or higher, $20,000 is not too onerous on you. So the elevator is something that can be, well, extremely beneficial and not too cost prohibitive. And then the highest level of accessible architecture in Canada, I think we tend to refer to the term accessibility more often than not. In the United States, the term used more frequently is called universal design. And in essence, we're trying to design spaces and products that accommodate as many people as possible in the best way possible. And nowhere do we see this better recognized in a residential context as the bathroom wet room. So if we design our bathrooms so that they're like big wet rooms that have shower areas that have no curbs, then forever we have a space that is usable by somebody standing in the shower, somebody who might transfer from a wheelchair onto a bench, or somebody who would just wheel straight into the shower area and shower right from a wheelchair. So this is something that I know is quite a bit more popular and used in the United States than in Canada, but it is something that's that I'm seeing more and more now here in Canada. And in terms of the what I call the building blocks that make housing more accessible for everyone, again, the key points are the no-step entrance, which is part of the visitability concept, the accessible bathroom, which is the wet room concept. The vertical access is typically an elevator. There are other means, stair lifts. Creating interior space that's spacious enough for somebody who might be using a mobility device. The kitchen, in many ways, is the hardest space to make easily used by as many people as possible, because you might have different individuals standing or sitting in a wheelchair trying to use the same kitchen. So it can be quite tricky. And wayfinding does definitely play a part in making life easier and safer for people with cognitive disabilities or people with visual limitations. So the no-step entrance, again, I talked about this. My own lived experience was, this is part of a children's book that I wrote before my other book, and really talked about our own house renovation and how my father used to drive up to our bungalow and park his van on our driveway and then just call my kids, his grandkids, and they would come running out and grab their treats from him. And that was the extent of his visit with his grandkids. And he really, really loved his grandkids. And this seemed to be a real shame that that this was it for him. And we could get him in the house, but it was a bit of a chore. And we did a renovation to our house some 20 years ago and added a second story. And I made sure that we re-poured our driveway and sidewalk so that there was no steps at the front door. So then my dad could easily just park his van on the driveway and enter our house very easily and have a much greater visit with his grandkids. And Visitability started in the United States, in Atlanta. It really, the quote that's used by the people that started it is that a no-step entrance helps everyone and hurts no one. And it's really hard to get hurt, I think, on a no-step entrance as opposed to falling down steps. So falls are a huge problem for people, especially people who are aging. And having no steps is just seems like such a easy thing to do and a very important thing to do. There's certainly some logistics building in this part of the world. So we do have to pay particular attention to creating a threshold that is easy for somebody in a wheelchair to get over, but also prevents water from getting in. So just have to think a little outside the box. It can be easily done. It's just not it hasn't always been that common, and that's where the challenge is to get the construction industry to buy into it. Accessible bathrooms, I talked a bit about the wet room. Here in this image, you'll see that that we have a shower area that is curbless, so somebody can wheel right into it, and we have countertops that are at different heights for an individual that might be standing and somebody who would be sitting and can get in underneath the sink. And very important to point out is that accessible features in no way compromise your aesthetic feelings about a home. So however you want to decorate your home, the accessibility features won't get in the way of that. And your wet room can really look like whatever you want it to. So any kind of tile pattern, any flooring, as long as it's safe and non-slip. And newer on the market is what we call the trench drain, which again, the industry is recognizing that a lot of people like the large format tiles in a bathroom, and the trench drain allows just a singular slope to the drain and allows you to have more options in terms of how you can finish the bathroom. So again, never taking out the aesthetics in all of this. For people as they age in place, they really do desire a space that is beautiful. And sometimes they feel that the accessibility features will compromise that. The elevator I talked about already, again, the style of the elevator, the look of it can be anything that you want it to be. When we look at interior spaces, we have to make sure that things are just a little bit wider. But even a 3-foot wide hallway is typically enough for somebody in a wheelchair to move through. As long as we have doors that are 3 feet wide inside, and that is something that is quite commonplace today. And as we think about other spaces like our laundry and bedrooms, even the kitchen, just think about somebody in a wheelchair turning around in that space. And of course, there are many different sizes and shapes that people who use wheelchairs come in. So we can't always satisfy every single person that uses a wheelchair, but we try to design that's tailored to the particular resident of the home. And kitchen design has really come a long way, especially in regards to attracting our senior population. So in kitchens now, we have a lot more options in terms of appliances, drawers that pull all the way out, shelving that pulls all the way out, just making things easier to reach both down and up. So the kitchen industry, cabinet industry has really come a long way in terms of attracting people with some mobility challenges. This kind of thing, a little pantry with the drawers that pull straight out. All of this makes reaching a lot easier. When it comes to wayfinding, I just like to use a lot of color and texture contrast that helps people navigate the environment, the interior environment a little easier. And that texture and color contrast is used strategically to help people focus their attention on specific items like doorways. So door frames that are a different color than the walls, for example. Texture in the floor can often help people who have low vision or who are blind recognize that maybe there's a change in direction or something's coming up that's potentially going to be in their way. So these are all cues. So for me as a designer, I don't just pick colors for the sake of picking colors and try to find the trendy colors of the day. It's used quite strategically. Myself as an architect, I've been doing a lot of group homes. They tend to be a bit more on the smaller range, 10 bedrooms, 20 bedrooms, that kind of size of project. And again, a lot of times it is for people who are aging, Alzheimer's or dementia, and the wayfinding becomes an incredibly critical part of the design process. And it's interesting, I've been watching the news this morning, and the census came out and just talking about how large our aging population is here in Canada. And by 2030, and I guess I'm sort of the last of the baby boomers myself, being born in 1964. So I'll be 65 in 2030. That'll be the end of or that's when all the baby boomers will reach 65. So we're in for a large population of people who are older, and we don't always have the younger population that will be there to help take care of the older residents. So we have some real challenges ahead, for sure. It's never lost on me, though, that I was kind of, myself and many others were talking about this 30 years ago. So it's a little bit surprising and disappointing to hear that this is suddenly becoming an issue. We saw this trend coming when we've seen it coming for a very long time. And by 2050, there'll be a kind of different generation, a younger generation probably. But again, all of those, even that younger generation will benefit from this strategy of creating adaptable and accessible and universal housing for aging in place. It's just more adaptable, it's more flexible to different family types. When it comes to the visitability, it was something that definitely started as a benefit for people who use wheelchairs. But now we recognize, same with curb cuts, we recognize that many people benefit. Young families with young children and using baby carriages and strollers, they're quite large at times. People with bikes, it's just so much easier to get in and out of a house without steps. In Edmonton, I would say, certainly in all of Canada, there's been a real push to develop our mature neighborhoods and our inner city communities. So infill housing has become something quite critical and important to the various municipalities in Canada. And I've tried to make myself available talking with the accessibility lens, so to speak. And so these infill housing projects tend to be rather tall and skinny and don't lend themselves that nicely to having a good situation for aging in place. So it almost would always need the inclusion of an elevator to get you up and down the various levels of the home, anywhere from 3 to 4 stories. But having said that, it can be done and should be done. And so I'm always, again, like I said, make myself available to the city planners here in Edmonton, especially to let them know that these are important considerations. And when it comes to aging in place, for some people, this could be an ideal situation where you move from a rather large single family house with lots of yard and maintenance and so on to a smaller place, but within the same community. So you've lived in a community for a really long time and you don't want to move away from it. This gives you that option to stay, but just maybe in a smaller home. And just different strategies. This one is a threeplex, taking up 2 inner city lots. So we can try to squeeze in 3, increase the density, which will help us make the dwellings more affordable. And again, making sure that we use all of the building blocks that I've already mentioned in the design of the homes. And this idea of multi-generational housing is something that's becoming more and more important. Certainly in this, myself as a sort of sandwich generation person, the idea of kids not necessarily leaving the home that early, parents potentially moving back in with you. This is all challenging us as designers to come up with more innovative designs for this type of multi-generational housing. Parts of Europe, especially I find in the Scandinavian countries and Holland, they've come up with a concept called co-housing, which is not cooperative housing. It's owned housing, but it tends to be something that provides a more community type spirit in the design. And when I was studying this in school, I always thought this idea of co-housing would be a great way to age in a community, whereas this particular resident said it takes them 45 minutes and 2 beers to get from the parking lot to their front door. So it seems like a pretty good community to live in. And then just in the last 5 minutes here, I'll just quickly go through a house that I designed some years ago for a couple that wanted to age in place. So they recognized as an empty nester couple that they would like to stay within their community. They actually moved, bought a lot three doors down from their existing house, which had about 6 levels and a great deal of stairs. And they created a house that would allow them to never have to worry about moving again. They in particular like the kind of more contemporary modern aesthetic, and the accessibility features again that were in the home did not compromise that aesthetic, this modern aesthetic that they were looking for. So here you can see that in this image of the exterior, the front door has no steps leading to it. And the garage is also at the same level. The garage floor is at the same level as the entrance level. The entrance level has bedrooms and an office space on it. And the uppermost floor has the kitchen, living, and dining. And the lowest floor is a walkout basement, which has a potential rental or caregiver suite. So this is the view from the back. And this is the uppermost level. Again, very, very open and spacious for them. Great clients to work with. They did a lot of homework themselves. They understood what it meant to create housing that would allow them to age in place. A lot of the detailing is done to make their lives easier. And you can see that there's an elevator in this design. They were one client that originally thought they would add the elevator when they absolutely needed it, but they added it right away. And the entrance level, the garage being level with the main floor, and also no steps at the front door as well. And then down in the lowest level, there is a space where they could use it to, and I think they currently use it as a space to rent out to university students, but they know that they have this space that if they ever did need a caregiver, the space is there for them. And again, their particular aesthetic, they have beautiful views of the river valley and also a view back to the downtown. They have an eclectic art collection of both contemporary and more traditional art, furniture, wall hung art, and worked very closely with them to make sure that it had this look that they were going for. So that's it for me. Here's my contact information. I'm only too happy to field phone calls or emails when you have them. I've been able to populate my website with quite a bit of information. So it's not just a website with a lot of pretty pictures of buildings I've designed, but more information, articles I've written, and short videos and so on. So I encourage you to have a look at things and learn more about this subject that I, in many ways, was only really able to kind of briefly touch on. And I'll be certainly around to be part of the question and answer portion of this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ron. That was a really interesting presentation. I appreciated all the examples of really attractive and accessible design, and also for reminding us of the importance of consulting with people who have lived experience as you're thinking things through. So that's great.
Thanks.
I'll turn it over now to Rachelle Butler for the RAD Renovations program. Just give her a moment to queue up and get the screen shared.
Great, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you, Ron. So hello, everyone. My name is Rachelle Butler. I'm the program coordinator for the RAD Renovations program, that's Residential Accessible Design, here at Accessible Housing. Accessible Housing is a nonprofit charitable organization that has been servicing Calgary for the last 40 years. So just a little bit about what we do, since I started my work with accessible housing in 2017, we have been able to assist hundreds of individuals who are limited, have limited mobility and limited income to retrofit their homes and to obtain accessible renovations. So that process also includes applying for funding from available funding from the government and project-specific funding from different organizations, and then assisting them with the actual construction of the work. Now, as we go into our next stage here with our program, we are also assisting folks of all levels of income now in regards to obtaining residential renovations for their homes, design, site assessments, really looking at their homes to see, is the construction feasible, and also working with organizations and businesses for their accessibility needs as well. Next slide, please. So before we start here, I'd like to play a game. I know that all of us here were very versed with the needs of accessibility, but for those who may not be, let's just, I'd like for you to please put your hand up at home, wherever you may be, if you know someone who is aging and having trouble getting up and down the stairs. So that may be a neighbor, or maybe, your friend's parent or someone you were in conversation with. Okay, and then now keep your hands up, or put your hand up if you have an aging parent who also has trouble getting around their home. So I'm imagining here, if we were all together in person, that a lot more hands would be up in the air right now. Okay, and so lastly, please put your hand up if you will in fact also age one day. So everyone's hands should be up by now. So as we can see, we are all affected by accessibility, by mobility, by our environments, and being able to work with our day-to-day, and how do we integrate that with our homes and our communities. Next slide, please. So the different things that can affect, as Ron was talking about, not only folks who are maybe aging or seniors or use mobility aids, because a lot of people think that accessibility only affects a very certain small specific demographic. But in fact, parents with strollers, if we've had a bit of an injury, if we say maybe there's a sprained ankle even, or a foot, unexpected medical emergency, all of these factors can affect us on either limited time or, on a longer time. And having these things to think about now before it hits us is really important. It's important to learn about these things. And not only that, but to normalize, because there is a stigma around it, right? And, even when we do as a group, as our team, if we're at a trade show, let's say at a renovation show, and we start talking about, some of these things are things we want to start thinking about early on, not waiting until an emergency hits. And it's really interesting the different reactions that we can get. And that's what tells us that we have quite a ways to go to really start talking about how important this is to life in general. Next slide, please. Okay, so I won't go too much into the different forms of accessibility because I know that Ron did an amazing job covering all of that, but there are a couple renovations that most folks will gravitate towards. So as they are choosing to age in place in their home and looking towards making some adjustments and modifications, the two areas that we have seen as priorities is always, of course, the accessible entrance, because we want to be able to get in and out of the house in case of an emergency, as well as be able to still reach your outside community outside of the home. And the second one is a bathroom, as we'll go into. So it's a little bit tough because in Alberta we have RAMP, which is government funding that will go towards accessible modifications. Now, this is for limited mobility and low income individuals. So that's who would qualify for this type of funding that's available. And there is a maximum of $15,000 available over a 10-year period. So you can apply up to $7,500 twice in a 10-year period. So typically what we see is that amount of funding gets split between an accessible entrance and a bathroom as our clients' main priorities. So when we're looking at an accessible entrance, the first thing that people usually will kind of decide on or think is having a ramp. Now, the issue that can present itself sometimes with having a ramp is that for every inch in height from the threshold of your door to where you're landing, so you can see here in the second little diagram there, you want to have at least a foot in length of ramp. So if that's 30 inches high, you might need a 30-foot ramp. And that doesn't include our resting space, switchbacks. So often there's not enough space for a ramp, but in the case where there is enough space, you can see here, this is where it worked out. But this is really important because you will see sometimes if you're driving through neighborhoods, folks will just construct a ramp as is, and that can be a roller coaster if it is not to code, because a lot of people don't know the codes and the safety behind it. So that's the first thing. So that if there's not enough space for a ramp, we can go to the next slide. Then our options would be a porch lift. Now, these drawings here were created by Caitlin Woods, architecture student from the University of Calgary, through a project that we all worked on together in conjunction with City of Calgary. And she has shown here the different kind of trade-offs that we have as far as installing a ramp at an entrance or installing the lift. Now, with the lift, you could go to the next slide, please. So with the porch lift, essentially what happens here is a wooden deck is built on top of the existing concrete stairs. So this deck is now flush to the door so that you can roll right into the door. And then we have the actual lift itself, which is almost like a mini elevator. So you would roll on, press the button, it has keys, and then it would lift up all the way to the same level as where the deck is. There's risers for pedestrian access, of course, as well. And then in the future, if you no longer need the lift, you can donate that lift to Easter Seals Alberta, and they hold a pool for others in need, and so it gets donated back into the community. And then you can easily take down the wooden deck to return everything back to its state prior to. It's really important as well when you have the lift that you have an accessible pathway. You can't really see it in the snow there, but the concrete pathway has been widened to ensure that if we are using a walker, if we are using a wheelchair, if there is a stroller, that we can push it up along the pathway and we're not going to fall into the sides. Winter temperatures, yeah, that's a great question. Just like any machinery, sometimes a lift may not work in -40 depending on its age and condition. So it is really important that you maintain these lifts. There's maintenance schedules that you can chat with the vendor who installs it for you. Okay, and next slide, please. So this lift here has been placed in the garage. So one of the trade-offs that we do see when it is in a garage, so the wonderful thing about the garage, obviously, is that we're not having to remove any snow, there's no ice, but in some cases, you can lose that parking spot, right? So you have the 2 parking spots, and now we only have 1. That can be a deal breaker sometimes for some homes where it's a multi-generational family, right? And the garage is really important because, of course, we live in Calgary, the winters can get really harsh. So we do often see some of the barriers that can occur when we're working with families and caring for elderly parents, is that there is a lot of discussion around what this change or these changes can mean for all of the occupants in the home. Many folks, especially the adult children, are now finding themselves as caregivers all of a sudden for the very first time with no prior awareness or education. They don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. So when we come in and we assess the space to make sure that construction is feasible, as we know, renovations in general, as is, can be extremely stressful. And when we're working with different types of housing, sometimes these homes have been built during a time when there were no building codes really being followed. So we're kind of walking into different situations. It can be stressful. So when we come in and we do the assessment, we put the design together, we work with our pool of different contractors, and we apply for funding, or we don't apply for funding for folks who aren't eligible. It can help take the stress off of the caregivers, but definitely there are some conversations to be had as far as what they may have to make adjustments to as far as their life. And that can be losing a parking spot in the garage. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the second piece, the second priority is typically a barrier-free wheel-in shower. So as you can see here, this is where bathtubs used to be. So we've taken the bathtub out and we have now created a space where you can roll into. Now you'll see in the middle photo there, there is a rubber dam. So that would assist with keeping the water from coming out. Of course, water is going to tread over if you are wheeling in and out, but as long as we make sure we keep that drain clean, essentially there should be no water flooding the bathroom there. Now there's grab bars in the shower there, and the hardware as well. We typically would have a sliding shower head, and this is all by recommendation from our clients' occupational therapists. So the occupational therapist, for those who may not know, through Alberta Health Services, or maybe it's a private OT occupational therapist, would come to the home and assess someone's physical needs, limited mobility needs, assess different areas of the home to see which area would be the most, the biggest priority, and would advise on certain things like placements of the grab bars, or walking through, who would be assisting. In most cases for our clients who are from our low income program, the space in the bathroom is very limited, very tiny. So we might not be able to put in that glass door, because we need that turning radius, especially if there's one other person in there assisting as well. So it can be quite tight, and it can be tricky because when we're applying for funding, there are certain dimensions, of course, we have to follow for accessibility codes, but not all dimensions and not all suggested codes fit into every type of living situation, especially when we're working with various types of different homes. So just something to think about and keep in mind for the barriers there. Next slide, please. Oh, right before. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is another diagram that Caitlin had put together. Now, we wanted to show this one because oftentimes there is a bit, if it's a two-story home, and let's say our aging parent or our individual with limited mobility, their bedroom is on the second floor. Okay, so now we're working with stairs. We have to figure out how do we get up and down those stairs so that they can access the rest of the home and be in community and get out of the house. So the option there would be possibly, as you can see, the stairs on the top left there, we could put a stair lift in, a straight stair lift. You would have to think about getting the wheelchair up and down. Sometimes some folks will have two walkers if they're using a walker. One is for upstairs, one is for downstairs, so they don't have to move it up and down. And then that way they can get to the kitchen and the living room. And then they would then opt to modify the bathroom on the second floor. Usually it's either an ensuite bathroom if they are in the master bedroom, if there is an ensuite, or it's the main bathroom on that floor. And that would be the barrier-free wheel-in shower. Maybe there's, if there's extra funding available, then they can maybe swap out the sinks so that there's an accessible sink or a toilet. Maybe they get a comfort height toilet, which is a little bit higher than your average toilet, or maybe they have grab bars. Now, if many times by the time that we come in and do a home assessment, a client might already be living in the living room or an extra den space that's on the main floor. So in that case, they don't have to think about going up and down the stairs anymore. You know, the family might be caring for them directly as they're in the living room. And then from there, we are then looking at, okay, how can we modify this half bath or the powder room on the main floor to create an accessible, you know, barrier-free shower. And the trade-offs there is that we may lose the washer and dryer because the laundry room is now, you know, we have to expand that to make space for a barrier-free wheel-in shower. So there are, there's quite a few things that sometimes have to come into play as far as figuring out what we might have to trade in order to create an accessible modification. And everybody is different. Every situation is very different. Great, next slide, please. So just another example here, what it may look like of taking out the bathtub and then having a space there that will make it much easier to take a shower and maintain dignity for your everyday routine. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we were talking about a stair lift. So stair lifts are very common. Now, the only tricky part about stair lifts is that if you have a straight staircase like this, where the landing is, it's very straightforward. We have a landing up top, we have a landing on the bottom. Then that is very easy because we can install stair lift. They can range between, you know, around maybe say $3,000 to $5,000, let's just say in that range. And they get installed, they don't get attached to the wall. They actually, their little legs get installed into the stairs itself with tiny screws. So they can easily be removed if it's no longer needed. And then the area is returned back to its original state. Now, if you have a curving staircase, so let's say your stair lift goes around and there's no landing, or if there is what looks like a landing, it's a triangle shape. In that case, we would not be able to install a straight stair lift like this. At that point, it would be a custom stair lift and the cost would go up. And often we are not able to find enough funding to cover a custom stair lift. So it can be tricky. So one thing that is important if you are looking for your forever home that you are going to age in place in. Take a look at your staircases. If you had to install a stair lift one day, chances are we would. Would you need a custom stair lift where the angles have to be created very specific to your staircase, or would you be able to have a straight stair lift like this, where maybe there is a landing in between that's rectangular, square, and you can walk along that landing with a handrail and then get onto the second stair lift. So just little things like that to think about for sure. Okay, next slide, please. So again, Caitlin's diagram here, just some different options. We have the straight stair lifts, we have the custom stair lift. Sometimes in the beginning, we just want an extra handrail, and that's okay. And there's replacing the flooring in the first part up there as well. So carpet, of course, removing the carpet. Oftentimes we'll remove the carpet so that it is much easier to wheel on with a wheelchair or a walker. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, available funding. So the different forms of funding that we have worked with in the past, we have the Residential Access Modification Program, RAMP. So that was the one I was telling everyone about, where you have $15,000 available over a 10-year period, and you can apply twice up to $7,500. So typically that would cover taking out the bathtub and putting in a barrier-free wheel-in shower. That typically would be about $7,500. The porch lift with the machine itself, let's say it's at the top end, around $5,000. Then you have your prep work with the concrete, because you want to have the pad underneath. We want to have a sidewalk that's wide enough that goes all the way to the street or the end of wherever you are, leaving the property. And then we have that wooden deck that can go up higher than $7,500 as well. So you have that one there. And then we have the SHARP program, the Seniors Home Repair and Adaptation Program through the government of Alberta. So if the client or the person in need of modification, it owns the home, then they can apply to this program, and they would receive a loan from the equity of their home to go towards renovations. That includes accessible modifications. Easter Seals Alberta, you can apply to them for porch lifts. Like I said before, they have a loan pool of used porch lifts that you can apply to, and that will help with funding as well. And then diagnosis-specific programs such as the MS Society, Cerebral Palsy Association, Muscular Dystrophy Canada. If you have a membership or a client or an aging parent has a specific diagnosis, I would definitely recommend joining to become a member to any programs such as these. And they also provide cost share funding to go towards modifications as well. And there's also different, I only focus on those two, but different modifications include doorway widenings. Sometimes if full-on doorway widening isn't possible, you can install clear swing hinges that just gives you maybe an inch or two through the door. And then I guess also, like I mentioned, flooring, replacing of flooring. We have our accessible entrances, the bathrooms. One thing I should mention is that the government of Alberta's funding from RAMP does not cover any kitchen modifications or exterior handrails. So sometimes someone may just need an exterior handrail. So just really looking into the different thresholds, income threshold and funding requirements for each one before you apply, for sure. All right, next one. Yeah, so that is it for me. I hope that has helped a little bit. It's one of the things that I do want to add is it oftentimes we will meet folks who they're in crisis mode because they may have waited a bit too long to start thinking about what adjustments maybe they'd like to make either for themselves or for their parents. And so I cannot stress enough how important it is to start thinking about these things ahead of time, knowing that it's a natural part of life. And as Ron mentioned, it would be great if the construction industry could embrace it earlier, because then there would be more education on it. But in the meantime, until then, we can definitely start looking around our homes to see what little adjustments can be made. And on our website, we have a little quiz that you can take just to do a quick inspection of the home to see what little things can be done as we transition. So I hope that helped you all. And yeah, if you have any questions for me, you can leave them till the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachelle. That was really informative. A lot of great concrete examples and considerations for us all to keep in mind. And also, I'm sensing this emerging theme about the fact that accessible design is going to affect all of us, and universal design can benefit all of us at some point. So I will now turn it over to our final presenter, Stephanie Firestone from AARP International. All yours, Stephanie.
Great. Hi, everyone. So you can go on to the next slide. I want to just start by telling you, since I'm the only person not from Canada, and you can go one more slide, about AARP, because AARP is a US-based organization. It started with this woman pictured, Ethel Percy Andrus. She was a high school principal in California. She was set to retire, and the Association of California Secondary School Principals offered her a job in charge of welfare. She learned that retirement plans for teachers essentially paid $40 a month, not enough to live on, certainly not with dignity. And one day she received a call from a shopkeeper nearby, in a town nearby, and said a teacher that he knew was in poor health. So Dr. Andrews drove to the address provided. Nobody answered, and the man next door told her that the resident of the house was not older and not in need, but then he remembered that there was a woman living in the back, is what he said. So Dr. Andrews went around back and found a woman who she realized had actually worked for her in her school, living in the chicken house. So the impact of that visit essentially led her to found the National Retired Teachers Association, which advocated for retired teachers for health insurance, tax benefits, housing improvements, and a number of other things. And that essentially evolved into her founding of AARP in 1958. So AARP is a social mission organization with 38 million members, but it's intended to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And we have offices in the 50 states plus territories and Washington, D.C. And we advocate a lot on livable communities issues. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little here. Particularly under that broad heading of what we call livable communities, our network of age-friendly states and communities. Essentially, we are an affiliate of what Emily talked about at the beginning, the WHO's global network of age-friendly cities and communities. And essentially, we look to help each community become more and more age-friendly over time. We started in 2012 with 10 communities, and now, as you can see, have 640 communities, more than that actually now, plus 9 states and 1 US territory. And each of those programs goes by those 8 domains of livability that are part of the age-friendly program. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we provide. One of them is our Livability Index, and this is the new front page. Was just updated, literally released April 18th. So you can find it in Livability Index under AARP. It is only a US model, so this it only includes US locations, so it would not be something that you could use in Canada, but it's something that could serve and has served as a model for many countries. So essentially, the value of it is in identifying how livable a community is for all ages. And it essentially goes down to the census tract. So it's a neighborhood level. You can put in any address or a city's name or a county and find out how it ranks. And it's been used by a lot of municipalities when they do an age-friendly program, or even just a livable communities if they're not formally a part of our network, but they want to try to improve the age friendliness of their community. It's been used in some cases to sort of help them prioritize where they're scoring the lowest, what are the issues that really are the most that they need to address first. It helps people to relocate if they're looking to move. And actually, we now work with the National Association of Realtors in the US. They included a link to it on their website because when people are looking for mortgages and where people are, looking to move, that's something that they will provide the score. So next slide, I just went in and did Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where I live. So you can see how it gives an overall livability score. Don't think that 63 is low. It's actually on the very higher end. 100 is impossible. And I think the highest score is in the 80s somewhere. Next slide, please. So it gives all of these categories. Now, this is almost exactly overlaps the 8 domains of livable, of age-friendly communities. It's 7 domains. And as you can see, there's a score for each of these different domains. So housing, neighborhood, transportation. And within each of those domains, you have 2 scores. One is for metric and one is for policy. So if you go to the next slide, I'll give you an example under housing. So this is a metric. So it's what exists today. What, are there 0-step entries? What's the level of availability of multifamily housing, the cost, the affordability. So all of these existing metrics. And one of the things that we started doing a couple of years ago is providing also a glance so you can see the improvement or, whether they're, in the case of housing costs, you can see that the number has gone down from 2012 to 2015 to 2022. And then it gives you the median neighborhood in the US. Next slide. And then this is the same housing category under policies. So this tells you sort of what are policies that community has, what laws have they passed, what ordinances do they have that bode for improvement in any particular area. So, are there state manufactured housing protections? Is there accessory dwelling unit support? And then are there state and local plans to create age-friendly communities? So, are there any policies that they've enacted? And you can see whether there's improvement also on that if you go into another part of the website. Next slide, please. So that's one really important tool. These are other tools are just kind of guidance, guiding documents that we provide that are free of cost to order or to download at arp.org/livable. And so you can see, the number of and types of materials that you might, find accessible. I chose sort of a few that I think, might be of particular interest to this group around housing. So we can go to the next slide, please. So the first one is a home fit guide. Just to make a point that in the United States and similar in the UK, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but I assume that also the majority in the US, 80% of housing that it will be needed for the next few decades has already been built. So essentially, this is, we have to advocate for new building, that it is age friendly and incorporates all, the critical features that Rachelle and Ron talked about. But we also need to look at how to renovate, which is one of the things that Rachelle was talking about, our existing housing. We have a rapidly changing demographics. I think Ron mentioned the aging, and someone mentioned in the chat that the census numbers came out. The same is true in the United States and in most of the world, very rapidly aging populations. So what Home Fit essentially provides is a room by room online tour. So you can, tour like the entrances and exits, kitchens, hallways, stairs, bedrooms, bathrooms, outdoor places. You can tour those separate areas and see, the different features that are recommended and how to do those. And essentially, the guide is, it can help elected officials, policymakers, and local leaders to learn about and advocate for housing options that communities need, so that residents can all thrive. This document's been translated into Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, and those are all available online as well. Next. So this is another document that I thought might be of interest. It started essentially with AARP Foundation, which is our charitable arm, sponsoring an exhibit at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. The exhibit was called Making Room, Housing for a Changing America, and it talks about that disconnect between America's demographics and what our existing housing options are. In the US, 20% of households are nuclear families today, but the housing market largely, remains fixated on the needs of nuclear families. Adults living alone now account for around 30% of American households. Multi-generational households, Ron mentioned, that has been on the rise in the US since 1980. It was at a low of about 12%. Before the pandemic, it was around 21%. One survey by a very reputable organization called Generations United estimates, as of, I think it was June 2021 that they did their survey, that that number is up to about 26% in the US. So this publication essentially provides different housing options that better serve, people of all ages. And, it has a collection of more than 36 housing solutions. It is also interactive, provides an interactive tour of the open house, the exhibit, which is a furnished demonstration home that was created for the exhibition, and that could seamlessly accommodate three entirely different household living arrangements. There is a webinar, there are videos online. So really this is just kind of a rallying cry for increasing the menu of housing options. Next slide, please. Another that's been talked about that Ron mentioned is accessory dwelling units. So we have a few documents. One is this ABCs of ADUs, which is a guide to accessory dwelling units and how they expand housing options for people of all ages. This is an award-winning 24-page introduction and best practices guide for how towns and cities and counties and states provinces could include ADUs in their mix of housing options. We also have something called a step-by-step guide to design and development. That's a catalog with visuals that show how ADUs can be easily designed to serve people of different ages and abilities. That includes also information on financing and budgeting for an ADU project. There are also a number of videos, again, including an animated tour. And then the second piece I have here at the bottom is missing middle housing, which is anything from a duplex to triplex, fourplex, cottage style apartments. So all of those options in the middle that in the US post World War II became very, very popular options, but in large part due to zoning changes in the US and a lot of local governments, these missing middle housing options are not allowed in a lot of places. And so that's something that all of our livable communities, I shouldn't say all, but many of our communities that do livable community work in states and in local communities are advocating to change. And there have been a number of changes recently in the US on this. Next slide, please. So further on the multi-generational household piece that again was mentioned, and the most common types that Ron mentioned as well were kind of one adult, two generations that are adult generations. So that's his kids moving back in who are 25 years old plus, moving back in with parent, or an older parent living with their adult children. There are also other models, like what Generations United calls grand families, or grandparents raising a grandchild under the age of 25. So there was a steep decline, a steep rise even before the pandemic, like I said, and now, Pew Research just a couple of weeks ago released some new research findings on multi-generational households. And essentially, they indicated that this is not a trend that's abating. It is a trend that they see continuing. All right, next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the Equity by Design series. Equity by Design initiative is based on my experience as an urban planner. I worked a lot with bringing local planners together with aging professionals and health professionals who deal with aging populations at the local level to try to foster collaboration and understanding, common language, at least at the beginning. But over time, I started also talking to more architects, designers, developers, and other professionals in the built environment. So at the end of 2019, we collaborated with a couple of other partners in Europe, and we brought together a select group of about 20 of these professionals in a transatlantic leaders forum. And what emerged essentially was a set of guiding principles for the built environment sector. You can go to the next slide. And essentially, this is the document. These are kind of the critical areas that this group felt need to be addressed. And that, that sort of list of principles guided a dialogue series that we did on our website. We have 2 to 4 minute videos with key insights from those conversations, so that it might be worth looking at. We also have recordings for the full conversations. And these topics, I don't know if you can see it closely, but real quick, are enable by design, drive informed demand, so consumer demand, alleviate disparities, create appropriate financial products to support these kinds of housing opportunities, prioritize connectivity, the technology side, facilitate intergenerational engagement, lead cross-sector collaboration, and infuse age-friendliness in other global priorities. So this is available on our website, but I'll just go through a few of them to give you a sense of where we're focused. Next slide, please. So this is the first two. The first one, enable by design, was a term coined by my partner early on in this work, Esther Greenhouse. So around the fact that built environments were designed for the average height male between the ages of 20 to 40, which really forces everyone else, which is all of us, most of us, to adopt. If the environment is overly demanding, people struggle, but if it's under demanding, people then don't have the opportunity to function within their abilities. So their abilities can actually atrophy. So in many cases, we find our built environments are actually disabling in that way. So this principle focuses on improving the fit between people's needs and the environments in which they live. And then the second one, drive informed demand. I show a picture of the Lifelong Housing Certified program in the Rogue Valley in Oregon. Drive informed demand deals with the fact that housing has been built the same way for so long that people have a hard time envisioning anything beyond kind of a narrow range of products. And so consumers, rarely know what to ask for. And so they're not demanding any better. So this is just an example of a voluntary lifelong housing certification program, which is, one way of sort of driving that demand. Next slide, please. Alleviating disparities is a really important piece of our work. COVID-19 has highlighted the ways that we've marginalized certain groups of people, older adults, but also BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we've done this in many US communities by physically segregating people of different ages, as well as those various backgrounds over decades, and then often disinvesting in the places where they live. So those communities are also frequently beset by educational, health, and other disadvantages and disparities as well. So this principle is around needing to create and maintain enabling environments in disproportionately impacted communities as a vehicle for alleviating disparities. One of our dialogue experts pointed out that the people closest to the problem are the people closest to the solution. This was mentioned by Ron at the beginning of his presentation around disabilities, but that has to do with people from varying backgrounds and cultural backgrounds as well. So his team essentially focuses on bringing everyday people from the margins into the center of participatory planning processes. And what we found through these conversations is that effectively engaging residents to advocate for their interests in the space demands two important actions. So the first really is building their capacity. So how do we teach members of the local community the language of planning and design so that they can contribute their unique expertise in a meaningful way? And then the second action we found is needed is what this guest called democratizing data, or really investing in platforms that facilitate the generation of input or data directly from the community members. And then, of course, needing to ensure that those community-derived data are actually helpful and used to drive local decision-making. Next, please. So this one is around the technology piece. COVID lessons included the technology limitations. We learned that very well. So that's including broadband in rural areas, the lack of technology among the poor, and digital literacy, primarily among older adults. And that, those limitations we saw restricted people's access to healthcare, to remote engagement, and to other opportunities. So we've witnessed that the detrimental side of that, including people, older adults, many of whom were extremely isolated, but we also recognize there are possibilities. We think a lot of people underestimated the uptick in the use of technology by older adults during this time. But beyond access, the main focus of our conversation was actually around the surveillance society that we live in and the ethics of technology's development and its use. One of our guests pointed out that we're inviting a whole new level of sensors and even strangers to into our built environment, including on our bodies in some cases, but certainly in our homes on a mass scale. And so we discussed, who needs to be at the table designing the technology, and stressed that older people with those with disabilities have to inform the development of the technologies. These things are actually developed so quickly that the regulatory environment, the government certainly doesn't have time to get ahead of and regulate this space. So this one guest of ours pointed out that the older people and people with disabilities have the most to benefit if it goes right, but the most to lose if it goes wrong. One of the things that they recommended was developing an ethical roadmap for the development of the technology and really building in our values as it develops, instead of trying to layer it on later. Next slide, please. So these dialogues essentially brought about a conversation where we were asked by a lot of the folks in the built environment, so what does this look like in the field? So we started this second series called Principles in Action, where we have a case study on an innovation that's actually moving the needle in this space, and then a very informal conversation and invitation for people to dive deeper with the innovator behind the innovations. So we've engaged a few thousand built environment and related professionals from nearly 30 countries. Next, please. And I'll give you just a few examples of those. So one of the key culprits of ageism is we found a lack of opportunities for people to regularly interact with people across generations or intergenerationally. So this principle that I didn't talk about this one, but it addresses that need to facilitate engagement across all generations through the built environment. This was a case study from Future Homes Alliance in the UK, where a grassroots group began by a professor of planning, an older woman who decided that was very frustrated over the years with the fact that there is a dearth of appropriate housing opportunities for people as they're aging. And so she just sort of created around her a group of people who were interested, and this group then founded a nonprofit, and they have done everything from including a lot of stakeholders over a 5-year period, securing funding, designing this development that's going to have 54 1- and 2-bedroom apartments and 12 houses of 2 to 4 bedrooms. The housing, it's the development is intended to be multi-generational, but also very flexible. So they're building housing capable of adaptation that can flex around a person's situation as their needs or their life or their family's needs, their family's size changes over time. So there's a term that they use in the UK and I think in some other parts of Europe called right sizing, which I've been trying to adopt here in the US, as opposed to downsizing. But how do you right size within a community? So there are options to right size within that community. And the group is intentionally targeting lower income households by creating rental properties as opposed to ownership. Next slide, please. This is another great example called Ava Housing in Ireland. What we found in that 80%, as I mentioned, of housing that's already been built is that there are many older adults who have perhaps raised a family in a home and have been there for 30, 40 or more years and are living in that home by themselves now. So it's a home that is larger than they need, but they do want to age in place. They do not want to leave for a variety of reasons. And so they are, in many cases, asset rich because they've paid off their mortgage, but cash poor. And they're having a hard time in some places keeping up with increased property taxes, not to mention maintenance and all other kinds of things related to housing, as well as from a climate change standpoint, a lot of wasted heating and air conditioning in a space that's far more than they use. So one of the things they also found in and what they do essentially is they connect with this older person in this household. They work with them to modify the downstairs area so that person can age in place on that ground floor level alone. And then they modify the second story so that it's appropriate as a rental, as a single person rental unit. So that also brings them income. It also brings someone into their home, which in most cases is completely separated, but it is, right there in terms of, isolation, in terms of assistance. What they did, and I spoke with someone in Canada a while back who told me there are also, I don't remember what province, but that there are in many countries is a typical housing typology in certain from certain time periods. And so they in Ireland, there's this housing typology that's this two-story home that by having one housing typology that they're focusing on, they were able to create not only 2 or 3 design options that then can be modified slightly, but that also can go through the permitting process, so that they don't have to bother with the cost and the time involved to permit, to create that approval, not the permitting process. Building permit still is needed in most cases, but the planning process. And so, that's, I think, an interesting idea for a lot of other places. This nonprofit that does this ADA housing helps with the finance. They've looked at, both government loans, and they're helping with private bank to create some instruments, because a lot of these people, are on, do not have any additional income beyond very limited monthly. And one of the other interesting things that they did is there's a nearby hospital. And so they are collaborating with this nearby hospital, which, that kind of a healthcare center will invariably have people who are coming through doing residencies, a year or 2 years, or looking for a 1-bedroom, a single person occupancy, which is, very rare, in many countries, and that's affordable. And so, how interesting that they collaborated and can bring not only a person who can, rent the space, and they handle all aspects of that rental as well, on behalf of this older person, but they can bring somebody in with some kind of a medical background, which is sort of interesting as well. And then the last example on the next page is sort of on a larger scale. One of the participants in our London convening was a person who's the head of regeneration at Clarion Housing Group, which is the largest housing association in the UK, and the 5th largest developer in the UK. And as a result of the work that we did there and the conversation, they spent a year and created an age-friendly housing strategy, for their association. And so the key points of their strategy are to ensure their developments are exemplars of age-friendly homes and communities, to cultivate clear design standards and specifications for age-friendly housing, to ensure residents have the right home at the right time, again, that right sizing, including making sure that they know their housing options and help them anticipate changes as they age, delivering interventions across resident life cycles and understanding how these contribute to residents' well-being, and then targeting reductions in loneliness and isolation. So last page, please. Those cases that I just mentioned are all case studies that you can read on our website at aarpinternational.org under Equity by Design. And you can also listen to the recordings with those innovators and learn more. I also want to just mention our next event, which is on Tuesday, May 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern, which I think is 9 a.m. to your time, which is about the dearth of public restrooms. So it's called Restroom Deserts, where to go when you need to go. One of two people we're interviewing is the founder of an organization called World Toilet Organization, is a very interesting guy from Singapore, and he's going to be joining us, even though it's 11 p.m. to midnight his time. So you can register for that next event at the same place you can register for all of the future Equity by Design events as well. With that, I'll leave it to conversation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the presentation and the wealth of information and resources that our participants can access for their work. And thank you again to all three of our presenters, Ron, Rachelle, and Stephanie, for taking the time to be with us today and share all this valuable information with us. So we now have some time left for a Q&A component to today's session. There have been a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, so I will maybe start with those ones so that those can be responded to. But if you have a question that is on your mind, please feel free to pop it in the chat, or when the initial couple of questions that we've asked have been answered, feel free to raise your hand and you can unmute and ask your question directly. So one of the first questions that came up during one of the earlier presentation was, out of curiosity, what does the average accessible infill home cost? And I think this may have been directed at Ron.
The average infill house. I guess it depends. The easy one is I'm working on one right now. So we're tearing down a bungalow and we're building a new house that is going to be 2-story. It's I guess overall it's a little over 2,000 square feet on the main and second floor combined. And we're looking at probably like a little over $600,000 construction budget. So a good number to use is about $300 a square foot in new construction. So and that's more kind of the custom type. So it can certainly go up from there, but that's a good number to use.
Does that change based on accessibility features? Or I think one of the things you highlighted is a lot of the time accessible features don't necessarily add cost.
No, yeah, exactly. So you know what, you can't not say an elevator doesn't cost money. It does. So if you want to count that as an accessibility feature that costs money, then yeah, you're looking at between $20,000 and $30,000 depending on the type of elevator you get and the features you have. But generally speaking, you know, a no-step entrance does not really cost more. Doing a from scratch, doing a bathroom that's like a wet room really isn't more. Like these things they don't cost more money. They do. What you'd find though is if you went to a builder, you'd find that it would indeed cost more money because the builder builds in their kind of unknown factor. So because they maybe haven't done it before, they'll just price everything higher just because they think there's maybe potential learning curve. So you do want to find people that have the experience, which isn't always that easy these days, but you know, it'll come. I mean, you see it more and more. So, you know, even like elevators are quite popular now. Not hugely popular, but they're the kind of thing that hasn't gone up in price compared to a lot of the other features that you see in the construction industry. And that's just because there's more competition out there. So and same in the States, especially this idea of the curbless shower area is just very, very common, you know, much more commonplace than it is here. So it's not as challenging for the industry there than it is here.
Okay, terrific. That's really helpful. Thank you. There was one more question during the presentations that may also be directed at Ron and Rachelle. Do you have a sense of the average added maintenance and utility costs of a residential elevator? I think you said $20,000 for installation, but are there additional maintenance costs?
Yeah, the servicing is about $300 a year. So much like you'd get your furnace, if you had your furnace attended to once a year, you know, there's a cost to that. So definitely with an elevator, I'm told that it is, you know, kind of budget for about $300 a year.
Okay, terrific. Rachelle, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that response?
I think Ron covered it all.
Sounds great. All right, we have a new question in the chat as well. Any information on if there is funding available in Alberta for non-residential space modifications to places like offices and so on?
For retrofitting, There is a program, BRES, ERES, Disability Related Employment Services. It's for employers who may have an employee with limited mobility in need of an accessible modification to the office, but it is more so on the employee to apply, and it's a cost share from the government and the employer. There are some funding available at times in Alberta, sporadically every few years for community centers, but it's not offered, I don't think, so much on a regular basis. I'm still on the hunt for more funding because I feel that would very much encourage folks and employers and businesses to be able to modify their spaces.
Great, thank you for that. And I see that Cheryl Cooper has her hand up, so go ahead, Cheryl.
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. I'm going to take my hand down now. There we go. On behalf of everybody. So a question for it's Rachel, right, or Rachelle? Okay, Rachelle. Okay, Rachelle. When you have the RAD program, does it require a referral from a doctor or anything like that to in the application to the RAD program, or can just an individual person apply to RAD?
So at this time, our program is at full capacity, unfortunately, for low-income applicants. But generally speaking, if we did have our low-income program available at the moment, anybody can apply. But I would highly recommend at this time, if you have an occupational therapist, they should be able to assist you. You can go through Alberta Health Services, although the wait list is quite long, or you can hire a private occupational therapist. We have private occupational therapists that can come to the home for a small fee, and they can assist with applying for funding if you are in need of a modification. Now, if you do not qualify for low income funding from the government or any other specific organizations, we do have space in our other program in order to assist with any modifications that way, but it is our social enterprise branch, and it does have a cost to it, and all of our proceeds go back into the program so that we can continue assisting low income folks as well. Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, that was a good answer. I knew there was probably fees and other things associated and other ways of making referrals. So I just wanted to, clean that up for everybody definitely listening. I have a question for Ron too. Good presentation. In our efforts for truth and reconciliation and the calls for action, I believe it's 93 is the housing call for action. Are there specific designs to Indigenous homes? Have you run across requests for designs for Indigenous housing?
Yeah, and actually funny you should ask. Yes, actually. So one of the things that I've been doing in the last few years is working with a number of different communities here in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really been trying to, and I've been working quite a bit with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and their initiatives, but definitely my exposure to the communities and having, just for example, we're just finishing a healing center in Driftpile. Mm-hmm. More than 50% of the single family homes in these communities have big ramps leading to them. And so the historically, these homes have just been sort of plunked on the ground, and they're, 3 or more feet above. And all of a sudden now we've got this aging population within their communities, and they're really not quite sure what to do. So I think there's a real desire to make it happen. Certainly amongst those at CMHC. It like anything else though, change is just a really it's tough, right? So it's going to take some time. But myself and some others, we've been trying to engage the community in a way that they can take care of it themselves. So actually within their communities, build their own homes and take more charge of what they actually provide for their residents. So it's quite exciting, actually. It's not exciting that we're in this situation, but it's exciting to see that there's some movement.
I agree, Ron. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And not a question, but a comment for Stephanie. What's ARP's relation to carp? I'm a carper. Sorry, I just had to say, right?
Laura is a good friend of AARP, the CEO there, and so we enjoy working together when we can.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And definitely a good presentation with regards to all of the diversity. Not an easy task in housing because of the equity, and housing is such an individual thing. Like you know, in most cases, like for me, if I want to design my own home, I design my own home, right? So I can understand that that would be probably something that everybody would like an opportunity to do, but unfortunately, the funding just isn't there for individuals in low income or needing funding to build their homes. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks very much for the questions and the responses. I also see that Karen Thomas has her hand up. Please go ahead, Karen. Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Good morning, and thank you for the very enlightening presentation. I just have a quick question about climate change in the floodplain regarding the accessibility to buildings and having the entrance at ground level. And I'm wondering architecturally how you're dealing with this, Ron.
It kind of becomes a bit of a landscaping issue. So, you know, again, the general trend in the construction industry is, you know, try not to push dirt around too much, but you can, you know, and it's you can do things to shape the land so that obviously everything drains away from the home. My house, for example, just by circumstance happened to be a really easy issue. So, you know, it's a bungalow built in the late 60s. It's 2.5 feet above the ground. But we have quite a distance from the public sidewalk to the front entrance. So we just poured a very gently sloping sidewalk to the door. So everywhere except at the door is not a water issue, right? So a lot of people kind of have this thought that you take the house, that main floor, let's say, and everything just kind of sinks to that level. And so all of a sudden the whole house is potentially has water issues, but you just have to kind of landscape accordingly. And what I've discovered, not because we're short on time, but what I've discovered is it's sort of it's the way we've always done things. So if you go into newer neighborhoods, everything's about water management. So by the time a builder actually gets to the point of purchasing a piece of land or like a plot or a lot to build a house, everything's already been kind of created. So visitable housing, for example, the no-step entrance can be really a challenge because the initial thought when they designed the whole community layout wasn't visitability, or the no-step entrance wasn't a part of it. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to either check out CMHC, or in Winnipeg, there's a community called Bridgewater, and they designed the community to allow for what they called visitable housing, about 25%. And so they, right from the beginning, they designed the community landscape so it lent itself. So the builders just come in and they put their house in place, and you have an entranceway that's accessible. And the builders just went, wow, this was not a challenge at all, right? So it just takes it takes us to have it within our kind of cultural thinking that this is what we have to do, right? And right now it's keep water away from the doors, which is understood, but it's like that and nothing else, right? And it's okay. The challenge is to make a door entrance accessible for somebody with a mobility device, but also keep water out. So if that's the challenge, we're pretty clever people. I think we can figure it out quite easily, right? We've got builders, we've got architects and designers. We can do it. It's not really that hard. It's just the will has to be there.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone, for contributing those questions to the chat and to the discussion, and to our panelists for expanding a little bit on some of those things. So we are now coming to the end of our time slot. So it's just about time to wrap things up and get you going on time. Oh, Karen, you had one more question? Nope.
No, actually, I don't. I'm just trying to take my hand down, but I guess it's already done.
That's okay. Okay, thank you. I'll thank our three panelists again one final time for all their experience and all the expertise that they've shared with us today, and all the resources that they've flagged for us to keep looking at as we move forward. As I mentioned, this is the third session in our 5-session age-friendly housing series, and so I would very much invite you, if you enjoyed today's presentation, to visit corealberta.ca to register for the remaining 2 sessions in May and June. So May 18th, we will be talking about some innovative age-friendly housing models for seniors. We're hoping to have kind of a panel format with some very specific examples. And then in June, June 22nd, we will be looking at supportive housing and continuing care. And so with that, I will thank our panelists, thank all our participants, and wish you all a very excellent rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.